impact, which is something that we've been thinking about all along as we've looked at that. And I'm going to take you directly into the Mountain View. This is the Mountain View existing aerial, nearly existing aerial. You can see that in this path, the path is still under development, and the new car queuing area is not on there yet. But it does show what we're talking about here, which is our main clubhouse, our arts and crafts admin structure, our golf and tennis and pool, golf, pool and fitness, and our tennis in the front here. And you know, the good parking, the service entries over here, our main entries here, and we'll see all of that on the next slide, which is now the design overlay on top of the aerial photo, and the things that we were thinking about doing, the things that we've all been talking about. Not a lot has changed, obviously. It's the last meeting. We didn't have a lot of change coming out of the last meeting, so things are now getting sort of refined, and some things have been sort of in the same place for several meetings now. Other things have been adjusted as we go along. And I think the thing that we talked about in the last meeting was the idea of getting a true tennis center for the entire community here with just one set of satellite courts up at the preserve, rather than having 3 different sets of courts around the facility. And so we end up with 8 courts in this location with a new, which is, they'd all be new, and then you'd end up with a tennis pavilion and other pavilions in here, and potentially adding some parking into the hillside here to replace parking that gets lost when you do this tennis project. And the good thing about this is, from the point of view of tennis players, and I think others, is I always hear that tennis players like this sort of double court arrangement where people are together and that kind of thing. So I think that this is both an improvement in site usage, and it lets us use other parts of our community in different ways when we do that. So it creates more gathering opportunity around the tennis program as this becoming the main tennis hub for the community. And then up at the top of the page, you know, the golf simulators outside the golf shop, our fitness rooms, and other activities that we have here. The last piece of that puzzle was to enclose the lap pool, which came up at the previous meeting. I missed it, and now we've got it on the plan, showing an enclosed lap pool. We're just taking the existing pool and building a cover and walls around it. And that's, you know, to be determined how extensive that project is, but it's on the map now and reserved for that activity. Same thing with the improvements of maybe potentially adding a second story as needed to get a you know, facility maintenance, employee support space, resident welcome center. All of those things that happen can all happen because you can spread out here once you move some things off the first floor onto the second floor. And the main thing that we'll talk about on this diagram next is this called clubhouse, or the main clubhouse area for Mountain View. And then the last piece of the puzzle is the potential for developing a piece of our hillside. And this isn't really meant to be a development outline. It's really meant to be an imaginary outline that says, well, how big would that take? How much space would that take on a hillside if you had 2.5 acres or if you had 1 acre? And so the green box is the 2.5 acres, and the pink box is the 1 acre site. And that sort of relates to the existing sites, or the existing maintenance sites are about 1 acre. And a 2.5 acre site is what I would typically see at a community like this, trying to do CAM and a golf course all in the same area, creating a good central site. So probably somewhere in those ranges is where we're going to end up in that kind of thing. We're expanding the service yard as well. So that's all over the aerial. We take the aerial away, and sometimes that's a little easier to see all of the text and all that kind of stuff. So we end up with virtually the same parking count with what we're doing with adding a parking area here. You can see all of the things that we would do within an expanded and improved arts and crafts and admin building. Obviously the tennis courts, and then the most of the work at this site is surrounding around trying to get a properly sized kitchen and dining and outdoor dining and better landscaping to take advantage of the views, and a better event entry that really lets this be a multi-purpose clubhouse, a great gathering place for our entire community. Blow-ups of each individual area. So again, You can see where the lap pool sits in this blow up and how that would sort of surround it and potentially tie back into the house. This is an existing outdoor covered area today that you could just enclose relatively simply to get some indoor simulators and a lounge space that sort of creates another opportunity for community gathering and that kind of thing. This now blowing up the tennis court area and the solution there, sort of showing how the tennis courts can sort of, similar to the way the one courts are today, the two courts can overlap and tie in and just kind of somewhat get into some parking in a few places here as we do it. As we do this, also you rebuild the shade pavilions and the restroom pavilion and all of that kind of stuff. It would be a complete holistic solution to tennis when you would do that. And that's probably a project unto itself. And then down at this end of the club, we have our event entry, our great lawn, which would then give us place to do bocce and outdoor dining and fire pits, and all on a new landscape lawn and taking advantage of the great views that go off that way, as we all know exist. I think the other big feature of this is sort of the wraparound veranda. So as you're coming in the entry, we have now a covered veranda that comes all the way down to our new addition on this end, and as you come in, it goes all the way down and around the corner for our outdoor dining as well. I think it just is going to, there'll be ways of screening and doing all that kind of stuff, but it really will be a lot more convenient and interesting to be able to walk between these various areas, and obviously trying to deal with our service in the background, so expanding our service yard at the back there is another feature of the plan. This is the blow up. This is virtually exactly the same as what we showed you last time, but there were a few little minor things that we wanted to pick up and notes on that. But just to review, again, a new covered walkway along this way and a covered walking area in this area, and then covered outdoor dining and terrace along this area, fire pits and other kinds of outdoor activities with a completely new landscape lawn. Remember that these are new additions to the existing footprint, so this is where there is that outdoor area today off of the bar area, and this is where there's a bit of an outdoor area today off of the dining room area. And so we're filling those in to create a more linear dining room that sort of is taking advantage of all the views that are out this way. And then these could be, where all these arrows are, could be operable doors and windows that you could open that up under that cover on nice days, so that you have indoor, outdoor spaces with outdoor dining, much more contemporary style of dining that we're seeing in a lot of communities. And you're just taking more advantage of the outdoor area and being able to be both indoors and outdoors, and then fully outdoors in some sort of uncovered areas as you get further away from the kitchen. One of the big things that sort of drives this whole thing is the whole concept of today we have about less than 2,400 square feet of kitchen there. We're trying to deal with serving parties over here and a la carte dining over here and various things that might be going on in the various rooms. You would then want to be somewhere in the range of 5,100 square feet per kitchen. So rather than expanding the kitchen up the hill or out, we said, well, let's expand it towards the front, which allows us then to really rethink the way that dining room works. So that all works in that way. And again, where the exact location of the bar or the fireplace or other kinds of features, that's all further down the line, but this is trying to set a parameter for how much space we think we need to really serve our community well and to provide this sort of main bistro and bar lounge space for the entire community. Kitchen serves that, and then the other option on this other end of the plan here is this whole event entry. So we have the event foyer, which is today, this is the existing doors that you come in and come right into the room we're in. So the end of the existing hallway is right here, so all of this is new space. And the new space gives us a new sonorum room and an event foyer and new storage, which serves all of that space. And then it also expands out the service corridor so that we have good access into all of the various walled-off ballrooms from the kitchen back and forth, and also for furniture storage, more furniture storage. Then here we're just filling in the existing porch that you have today to get those storage areas. And one of the key aspects of this was as we first started talking about this, we wanted to have this, we're in this space and we don't have any way of taking advantage of the views. Well, that's not all that unusual because it's usually a focus. We're focused either on a screen or a speaker or talking or playing cards amongst ourselves or whatever we're doing in this room. It's more internally focused to what's going on in the room. But for those big events where we're coming and we want to remember where we are in the world, the idea was that this whole sonoran room could all be glass and this event foyer could all be glass so that as you come in and you do pre-function in this space, in this hallway space, in the sonoran room, in this event entry foyer, all of that is tied to that view with big windows that open up. And then when you move on into the ballroom to do the event, you're in there. And then as you leave, then you have a post-function area where again you can have meet and greets, and you're actually in that environment where you can see the views. And so that was our goal in trying to do what we did here. The other issue was we needed more space behind the scenes, and we're trying to grab that everywhere we can get it. And so we took the old sonoran room, which was in this area, and the old restrooms, and made this backstage furniture storage and green room space. So you can see the idea is that the green room for this stage, you can go back behind here to get into this area and have a green room and furniture storage and also a backstage area, which is well able to be accomplished in a 1,500 square foot box that we're showing there. That really gives you a lot more flexibility and a way to make this building sort of work for what we would envision for the future of the community, how you would really use the building in the future. So this is in all of the charts that you've seen. It's all the same information. So it's getting the bistro to the right size and the outdoor dining to the right size and the restrooms to the right size and the new sonoran room gets relocated and it's bigger. In our event foyer and our kitchen is expanded. So it sort of shows the key elements that are changing to sort of meet the new goal of the community. Now we're going to move over to Desert View. And at Desert View, obviously this is our theater. Yep. So go ahead.
Glenn, excuse me.
Yep.
So if you could go back to the diagram for a minute, of the kitchen area, that one more, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so, as I've been looking at this, I've been wondering, right now in this diagram, the whole bar, restaurant, everything, because you enlarge the kitchen footprint, the bar's gone.
Right.
You went into the fireplace,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, in thinking about that, because that's made much, phasing this or separating this into smaller chunks, but the kitchen still being the focus. That expanded service yard, that space out there, is there any way we could be going more to the right and less to the front? Just say we wanted to do the kitchen first, okay? And that's my mindset, okay? If you wanted to do the kitchen first, and yes, this would be the ideal if you could come forward and keep going, but if you can't, as a dollars. If you could go to the side further, that expanded service yard is a lot of space, okay? What I'm wondering is why isn't the kitchen just going further to the right and we moving the service yard and service entry further back around? You see what I'm thinking about?
Sure.
And every time I look at this, I'm saying, my yard, that space is so valuable. Is this an alternative or not?
It might be an alternative. One thing that we are thinking about that sort of, I'm not bringing to the committee because it's sort of just the way, but you like a nice rectangular box. So when we looked at this, we said, well, there's a nice big rectangular area where a lot of that, all the lines can get developed. And they may actually be going the wrong way in your current kitchen, just so you know. And so a lot of times those lines actually would like to be more perpendicular than parallel to the dining operation. It's not required, but this gives us the opportunity in this rectangular box to sort of rethink that kitchen completely. But to your point, if you got into it and you said, oh, well, first in an early phase, we don't want to try to, we don't want to move our bar, for example, or our fireplace. Maybe you could grab some space down here. Maybe you could grab some space here. I didn't want to, just back to the service yard question, I didn't want to push the service yard too far out this way because I'm seeing this being our great lawn, you know, and so as you kind of bring that great lawn around the corner, I didn't necessarily want that service yard, you know, pushed out, so it was sort of between your view of the hillside and the thing, but it could be. You could push the service yard out or back further and then get some more space in here. You know, everything is, it's a good point, you know, as you think about it. I don't know that I would necessarily, you know, I don't know, I have to think about how we want to change this diagram that we've been showing for this while, as to whether or not, you know, showing all of those things, you know, potentially you just show potential expansion area here, which then shows the potential of moving the yard out. I think the committee probably may want to think about that before you would recommend it, though.
Well, you're talking about completing the rectangle.
Right. So no, I see that.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. And so this
Yeah.
this is sort of back of house space today,
Yeah.
sort of storage and mechanical rooms and janitor closets and a restroom and all that kind of stuff. You can see it on the diagram. So if you complete the rectangle here,
Yes.
what that forces is, back to that earlier diagram, it forces this service yard pushing out more, which might have, obviously this is a turnaround for the service yard, right? Like this, where you would back, you know, they would come in and turn and then back into that thing. So if you push it too, I don't know, it's it may be a challenge. We were trying to keep it more compact.
You're not allowed to talk what you're talking about.
Okay, sorry. No, but I'm just thinking about, you know, we may have to look at alternatives as we
Absolutely.
flesh out the details of this. But, you know, the kitchen area, and the concern is that what is in the expanded service right now, service yard, is our cold storage for our food. Okay?
Oh, absolutely.
And in a prolonged way, we can't keep that going. We're waiting for our catastrophe there, right? So expanding into the service yard at least captures that extreme weakness that we have with the cold storage.
So if I could, Glenn, one of the things that I think we struggle with in this group is to understand what happens after this group dissolves.
Right.
And there's going to be a facilities committee that's going to be doing all the kinds of things you're talking about. It's going to be able to take this rough thinking ideas about expanding kitchens. I brought with me today the after action report of the Mountain View renovation that was done 11 years ago. That whole project was facilitated by a facilities committee of residents. That's the future for taking these ideas that we're developing here and refining them, expanding them for future board and resident consideration.
I think one thing that often happens is this is a general diagram of which way we think we need to go. Usually when you get into a more detailed improvement plan, for example, where you're doing just what Matt's talking about here, is you get into things and you start thinking about, well, I want the bar here, and then there's a committee, just like we are, who's thinking about, well, you know what, that bar would be better over here. And you go through a lot of the same things we're going through, and basically at that point, you will often encroach on this and push that out and do all of those kinds of things in a further on design process. So what I want this diagram that we're sort of the legacy of our committee to show is sort of our best thinking about how we want it to be arranged. And then if they get into it and say, you know what, the better option is to put a bump here, and then we don't have to do a bump, that's fine, but at least we have a stake in the ground that says, well, if you put the bump there, let's make it 5,000 square feet, you know, so it's big enough to do what we need to do. And we need a dining room that's something on the order of this. So I want our diagram to be clear and simple enough that it's easy for people to grasp and see what we were trying to do, and not too detailed so that it doesn't really, because we know that it's going to change. Things are going to change. Does that make sense to everybody sitting around the table here? But Denise, I think it's perfectly appropriate to think of pushing this bubble out and squaring it off and doing all those kinds of things, which then may save you some space in here. you can see that there's a lot of down. Every time you change a diagram, then oh, what, maybe that restroom doesn't want to be there. Maybe, you know, all that kind of stuff starts moving around. So. I think the thing that, I can't remember if it came out of the last, I guess it came out of the last meeting, this idea of this gathering place. Yeah, it did, right? So the concept was at the last meeting, somewhat different. We had this multi-use activity center coming down into this area, and we had more parking coming along in here. And so this gathering place idea seems to have some legs within our group, and I didn't want to leave that alone. So we took another look at it, and the concept here then became maybe less parking, right? So instead of going to what we had before, which was probably more than 100 spaces, we're adding about 68 spaces in here, and then the multi-use activity center slid up, and then that gave us a place to do this gathering place here, and then maintain the existing cornhole in its existing location. And then minor changes other than that, you know, the change the shape a little bit of this theater gathering place that we were trying to create. And it changed this, and then the other thing was we had left, you know, you had requested this more storage for the theater, and there's this sort of invert here that you can sort of fill that in and potentially get some more storage for the theater there, which ties right into the back of the house, without interrupting parking and all that kind of stuff. So that would be a place that you could potentially get 1,000 square feet plus probably a mezzanine, because you could probably build it quite high and pick up some storage in there. Say that again?
Where's the library and the workout?
The library is in here. The library is here. So as you come in the door here, the library is here. And the workout rooms, the two that are sort of meeting room workout rooms are here. And the main workout room is here. The theater is here. So I'm sorry, that's not real.
So the storage, Sean, the storage area he's pointing to right now is a gravel lot with a planter and a backup generator sitting in it.
Right above where you come up the stairs when you come out from the ground.
Yeah, there's an exit there. So we'd have to work out all of those kinds of details. But it's a place that you could pick it up. Potentially, you might have to push it out or whatever, but the concept was, could we put a storage there somewhere? And then our thought was, but I think maybe, Kevin, will you just make a note for me to put those notes on here about where the various things within the plan are, so that it's more easy to read for next time. For the board.
Where's our library?
Yeah, I don't want to think we're blowing up their library. No, we're maintaining it in its existing location. Go.
I can probably say no loud enough.
No.
The gathering place, is that an indoor space?
No, it's an outdoor space.
That's what I thought. Okay, it just sort of sounded like, okay, that's what I thought we
That-
said last time.
That was my intention, sort of a landscape garden, maybe it's a xeriscape kind of garden, and with shade covers and places that you could sit and gather together, obviously, as you're playing a game or after a pool. So this is an existing cabana at the pool. So it gives you just another option there for what we really want to do here is to have good community gathering, places for people to get together. And so it gives you an option for doing that. And it's obviously would support cornhole and whatever we would do in a multi-use and all of that kind of stuff. So, and again, some of these things could happen over time or whatever. This is all that same diagram you saw before in terms of that. This is our preserve site. Remember, everybody, the clubhouse up here, the pool, the tennis courts, which would remain. There's 3 of them. Our car parking, our automobile parking, and then there's this sort of place here, which is sort of just a space that might be usable for maintenance, and you'll see that on the diagram. And that's this, starting again at the front of the driveway coming into you'd have on your left as you drive in, you'd have this 15,000 square foot plus space, which is a possible maintenance facility. So we've identified that, and then obviously it would have to be well landscaped. And then as you're coming here to the front entry of the club, our main entry stays in its same location. Our athletic entry is new. Our golf shop entry, because our golf shop is right where my red dot is, an entry off the back porch, and then all of our viewing decks and all the things we're doing there, and our pool entry here coming into the pool. So today the pool entry is multiple ways, but here we have one way into the pool. And remember, all of these areas here are new additions onto the building. And then you'll see in the building itself the kitchen expansion, filling in the space in there, the existing fitness area becoming the poolside cafe, served right out of the kitchen. It's sort of a quick grab-and-go kind of spot. Our main entries here, our pool entries there, our athletic entries coming in this way, which goes past the golf shop into our new fitness rooms, which have views of the mountain views that are so excellent there. This is an expansion to the building, so this dash line shows where the building is. I think the change that we did from the last time was we squared this room off, so it comes all the way up to the hallway. Before there were some family restrooms up in here. And so we're up 3,850 square feet, almost 4,000 square feet of a great fitness opportunity at the preserve now, which is so much better. You only have 1,000 a day, and it's really tight in there. And then you have the ability, when you do this, to relocate, because we relocated the golf shop, you relocate the bar to indoor-outdoor bar. So as you come in the main entry, you can choose to turn left and go to the bar, or walk that way and turn right into the grill room, taking advantage of those views all the way along. Or that kind of opportunity to come up this way and use these outdoor patio spaces. For the big events, you have a partially covered new patio that's lowered down with a high roof over it, so you can pick up a big space for a big after golf event or any kind of event that you want to do there. Matt's having a going away party or something, so he's having a big event there or something like that. It could happen on that patio there. So that sort of gives you and this is all, the only thing that changed really in this diagram from what we showed you last time is squaring that off and moving the family restroom into the locker room space there, which would change, it may require some adjustment to where the sinks are and that kind of thing, but it could work, and still pick up a good family restroom. And then what we've done since the last time is, there's some discussion offline, we've separated the maintenance facilities into 3 options that we'd like to present to the board potentially. Option A is just fix what we've got, sort of where it is. And these could be mix and match options as well, but we're trying to put some structure around what it takes to do things. So the option A here is improve our existing facilities, so our preserve facility and our main camp and mountain view facilities could be improved in the way that was already thought of. There's already designs done for it, there's already some costing behind it, and we could at least go down that road and get that improvement underway. Obviously, as we looked at that as a group, we weren't particularly totally satisfied with that, so we came up with option B, which is some sort of additional facility up here on the hillside. And then option C, which sort of came out of the last meeting a little bit, was another option would be to do some version on the hillside here, maybe some sand storage or something up behind 9 Green. And then also potentially some space at the end of the driving range. There's some sort of blank space down there that's down the hill from the residences, which are off the page up here, so that you would be able to, as a resident in those houses, you'd be able to see over that facility because it's down the hill. And then that could sort of potentially fill in that space and get some more space in there. Now, obviously, all these things have a lot of engineering involved in them, right? Because this is a big swale that comes down the drain and all that kind of stuff. All that has to be worked out. Same thing with the mountainside site. There's water flows, there's all kinds of stuff. But it's identifying locations to say, before we do anything else in that location, let's remember if we need that maintenance, let's remember that that's an available site for us, and we should decide whether we need that maintenance before we come out and put a, I don't know, whatever, bocce ball courts up here or something like that. things happen in communities, things get legs in communities. And one of the things we're trying to do here is get to the point that you understand all of the projects across an entire master plan in context to each other, so that you don't just go out and do a thing and then regret that a few years later because you put it in the wrong spot and you spend a lot of money and nobody's happy with it and all that kind of stuff, and you sort of realize it later. Our hope is we sort of identified in a sort of a grand scale way all of the various aspects of all the things that we think we need in our community over a long term, and then we can sort of address that. As we decide that's a high priority and want to do it, then we can address it and say, pull out the master plan and say, well, these things have been done and that needs to be done, and that's a high priority now, so let's go and let's focus on that as a project and figure that project out. So we're going to talk a little bit about costs, and one reason I said all that just now is because I think budgeting is a big part of how do we put that in context. So we got it all all laid out. Many of the things have not changed very much, as I said. As we've been working on it, we've made the changes and they sort of started to gel into the place that they need to be. So I do an opinion of probable cost estimate for all of our projects. And the way I do it is at different levels, obviously, but primarily at a schematic design level. And then schematic design level at a master plan is really a unit cost estimate where for example, we know that there's 50 parking places we're adding. Well, we know a parking place typically costs this much to add. That's a unit cost, plus allowances. And I always include in my cost estimate things like construction. Well, that's the most important thing, and that's the thing that everybody thinks of when you think, what do we need to do to get a building built? Well, we need to hire a contractor, an architect, and get that building built. So a lot of times you walk around or you go around, you talk to somebody in the neighboring community and they say, how much did it cost to do that? And they'll say, well, the response will often be the construction cost was $2.1 million or something like that. But that often leaves out a lot of the other development costs that got that project built. And so I think that in general, about 60% of the total cost is in construction, general contractors' fees and overhead, profit and all that kind of stuff. The other 40% is in everything else, right? So that's the FF&E, the furniture, fixtures, and equipment that goes into it. It makes a kitchen a kitchen. The carpeting, the decorative lighting, all of those kinds of things are usually not in a contractor budget. Those are specified by an interior designer and bought separately and installed. Then there's professional fees and soft costs, right? So we got to pay the architects and the interior designers and all of those people. So we have to have an allowance to do that. So that's built in. I built that in at about a 15% rate in this budget based on the addition of these two numbers here, whatever those are. And then we like to have a project contingency and allowances as well. So the project contingency is about 15% of those two numbers as well. So you can sort of see that it all adds up and it sort of builds up from a base to get to a budget. And then in addition to that, there would be allowances. So for example, we know that there's going to be some site work or some utility work in an area. We don't really know what the total extent of that is now. So we put an allowance in there to say, well, that ought to cover that for that kind of money. And then we also obviously are carrying contingencies to cover blow-ups, things that, we didn't realize there was a gas line there or whatever, that kind of thing shows up in a project. All of those kinds of, well, we didn't realize things. We think it's a development and a planning tool. This is something that we should use, the board should use as a tool. This is not a project. We're not in any way saying that when you look at the numbers that are coming up, that Saddlebrook 2 community is going to run out and spend a bunch of money to do all these things and they're all a project. It's a planning tool that helps us start to prioritize what do we really think is important. And I think that really comes down to this sort of master plan cost. It's a range of expectation that we want to do. It allows for good planning and prioritization based on value. And what do I mean by value? Well, value is budget. What's it going to cost to do it? That's part of value. But it's also how needful are we of it? Like our maintenance facilities are pretty needful. And how desirous of it are we? better outdoor dining or better gathering spaces. Those are pretty desirable. And then lastly, in that sort of value proposition that we're thinking about, I think there's this notion of sort of future benefit. In other words, if we do a project and we do it the way McMahon would suggest you do it, you say, okay, that's where it's going to go. Now let's do that project and get it done. The future benefit to the community of having that project done for the next 20 to 50 years is great, because you don't have to worry about doing that project or thinking it's in the wrong space or anything like that. That project is done and you can move on to the next project. So all of those things go together in my mind to create what the value is, the value proposition is, and it's frankly, it's above our pay grade right now to figure that out, but it's something that we're presenting to the board to use, and then the board can move that on to the next committee in terms of figuring out finite plans. And that brings us sort of to these last sets, is that I'm always telling you, when you get to a point that you have a finite plan, something that you really want to do, and we've done a budget like this, at that point you probably have a bit of a refined budget, but before you do anything, before you actually are asking for anybody for anything, you're taking that to local contractors to actually get input to make sure that that finite plan works, especially if you're using me, because I'm from St. Louis. I do this all the time. Every day I'm writing cost estimates. I think rarely we make plus or minus 20% of whatever I'm telling you is what it's going to be. On a regular basis, it's plus or minus 4%. You know, sometimes it'll be a little less, sometimes it'll be a little more. There should be some, you should have some comfort that these numbers are not out of the box. They're not way out of scale to what you would actually find that it would cost. These are all in today's dollars, something that if you were to take any one of these projects and go and try to get it planned and permitted and built next year, this number should cover that as a budgetary number. If it gets much beyond that, then we start having to add inflation factors and trying to figure out what that is, which is beyond the scope of what we're trying to do in a master plan. It's not helpful to us as a design tool or as a planning tool or as a budgeting tool or thinking about prioritization. That's not really what this is about. This is about helping, ultimately, hopefully helping the board prioritize. I'm starting with the higher, what I perceive as the higher priority thing. So this committee can change my mind, just move things around, whatever, as we take it to the board. We have already some documents, very schematic documents prepared for the facilities at the Preserve and the Mountain View. And those two facilities are illustrated here on the right in these images. And those documents came with some budgetary numbers that a local contractor provided last year, almost a year ago today, actually, like the 23rd or something like that. And so those numbers were what I call the 60% number, right? They were the construction and some fees and stuff like that, but they didn't cover all the other stuff, the professional fees, the soft costs, the FF&E, the things that you have to, you know, a lot of these are barns, but at the same time, there's things that you'll buy to put in there that's FF&E equipment that needs to go into that space. So, so I bulked those numbers up that from the contractor, both to cover some inflation and also to cover the contingency and the professional fees and all the things that I think you'll need to face. And as I look at that, I'm thinking that that kind of project there is going to be budgeted in the 1.2 to 2.0 million range to fix up the maintenance facility in the way that they showed. And the same thing, which we've taken on as part of our option A, and the same thing, 2.5 to 3.1 down at the Mountain View. So that sort of sets some parameters around what we think this thing could cost. We also have identified that one additional site at the Preserve near the clubhouse, and I said, well, to develop that site might be 750 to $1 million, but it's sort of hard to know what I mean by that yet, because I'm thinking, well, you're going to flatten it, which is already pretty flat. You're going to put fencing around it. You're going to put utilities to it. You're going to basically make it ready to use as a landscape it, all of those kinds of things that we talked about. that's somewhere probably on that size site, 15,000 square feet. You're going to pave it. It's probably in that range of $750 to $1 million. Now start adding buildings and other kinds of, whatever else it is, those may be additive to that cost. But that sort of gives you at least a stake in the ground of where that kind of facility can come to. The next piece of that was, well, what does it cost if we do option B? Well, that's probably a $5 to $8 million project. Again, very variable based on how big it is, where it's going to be, all of that kind of engineering. But I do these a lot. I've done a lot of maintenance facilities over the years, and so my thought is that, $5 to $8 million is probably going to be where you are sort of in dealing with that kind of site. And similar kind of thing, 1.4 to 2.9 million for redeveloping other sites into maintenance facilities for all the kinds of things that you're doing in those half-acre sites as you're looking around the site to pick those up. That sort of, those two together are probably in that 1.4 to 2.9 million range as you look at it.
Could you go back to option A, Cory? And I apologize, I wasn't at the last meeting, but did we agree that to do option A, that another third site, the preserved potential clubhouse site, would be needed, required?
No, I don't think so. I put it.
It's just an addition, it's a possibility.
Exactly.
Okay.
I put it in just because it felt like it went well there.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I just want to clarify, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so moving on, we have the Desert View site, and that's sort of in the rate. So we've got obviously 19,000 square feet of a new multi-use center and parking and a gathering place and a theater addition and a storage addition. And so all of that taken together, somewhere in the 9.2 to 13.8 million range, I think, to do a project like that, if it was all done as one project. I think you could split this up fairly easily. You could say, okay, well, we're going to do a gathering place and do that, and that may be an early win for you, something less than $500,000 to get a landscape yard out there that has covers and a place that people can really feel like they can come together, and a new facility that supports an existing activity that has now become quite popular with that cornhole operation, plus it can support other activities that are going on there. And then ultimately, at some point in the future, 10 years from now, if that multi-purpose activity center became really important in the community to get that done, well, you can pull that out and say, well, we know where that's going to go, and you can sort of budget into that. That's the biggest chunk of that 9.2 to 13.8. Obviously, this is a relatively small chunk, and these other ones are relatively, even the parking, which you could say, okay, well, we're ready to do the tennis over the other side, and we want to get that parking done in an early phase. That's probably a $400,000 to $500,000 bill as well. So each one, and I got charts that sort of had all this laid out, but I was trying to give it to you in chunks so you can sort of start to understand it from that point of view. Here's the preserve clubhouse, which again, this is one that's hard to imagine how you're going to do this in multiple phases. It feels like, it's not impossible obviously, but it feels like once you commit to improving the preserved clubhouse, you need to make a pretty significant investment to get all the moving parts moved around at the same time so that everything ends up where it's going to need to be. And that's something in the range of that 14.6 to 17.5 kind of range, with all of these, patios, covers, new additions to the building, new kitchens, new poolside cafe, all new bar. Everything is new virtually inside the clubhouse. One thing you should also realize is that the way this master plan scale is sort of broken down is I start with the new construction, so how much it costs to do the new. Then I have a lower cost number per square foot, basically unit cost, for renovation spaces. And then in addition to that, all these white spaces that don't look like they've had anything done to them, I have a number in there for refurbishment. So that, just as Walter and I were talking earlier, there's certain things that need to be refurbished. Well, I've got a refurbishment allowance in all of these costs that covers anything that's sort of just white, it's not touched in terms of changing the plan. But you know that when you do all this, you can't leave that foyer looking like the foyer because it's going to look terrible next to all the new stuff that you do. So that all has to be done at the same time. So that's all included in a budget like this that we're talking about.
So Glenn, go back. One of the things I thought was interesting as you were talking about this is that, as you said, it's hard to imagine how you do this without doing it all kind of at the same time. And in fact, it probably means just shutting down that whole operation for a
18 months.
year,
Yeah.
a year and a half, okay. If you went back to the Desert View slide, one more back, your point here was just about every one of those activities, other than you gotta do something for the tennis.
Right.
But each and every one of those touches is potentially all by itself.
True.
And so it really doesn't impact any other operation down there, other than we gotta do something about the tennis. So very different kinds of projects that really need a lot more detailed development as you look at it. But you wouldn't shut anything down here, whereas you'd shut down the whole preserve for a long period of time.
I think you would, yeah.
Thanks.
Good point. Last is our Mountain View. And it's not last because it's lower priority necessarily. The first things I showed you seemed like higher priorities, but now it's just sort of this is a prioritization tool that we can use to talk about, well, this is more important than that. And I broke it up into the four major areas here. So the tennis, just doing a whole new tennis facility, something in the range of 1.8 to 2.4. Clubhouse facility, which is everything we talked about, all the things at that end and this end, something in the range of 15.6 to $20 million. And then we have our arts and crafts and admin building, which again, that may be pretty low priority right now, but at some point in the future, that's going to be busting at the seams and it has to be done. So you know that there's a $5 to $8 million project sitting out there. And the same thing in the golf shop and the pool, that's probably the lowest priority stuff that we have on the map right now. Everything that we've talked about, but it's of course, obviously the lowest priority is going to be one of the least expensive things to do. It doesn't always work out that way, but it does in this one. So that's sort of, hopefully that without, again, I want the community to think of these as planning tools, not we're running out and doing a project. You know, this is not about getting a project done. It's about how do we start to think about how can we get from where we are to an accomplished master plan. 25 years from now, 80% of the things on that master plan ought to be done. But it's going to take some time and effort and thought and individual planning and prioritization. Kevin, it's your turn.
Can we take some questions on this?
Sure. Any questions?
Nothing yet, okay.
I shocked them. They're all shock and awe.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn. Next, we were talking about, as Dan stated, the next meeting will be a presentation of all of this to the board, as well as background and those kinds of things. So we put together just some brief slides to go through that. And then again, we would work with a kind of subcommittee of this group as to what that PowerPoint presentation would look like as it goes to the board. That makes sense. So this is kind of an early draft is what our thoughts would be. You know, we started talking about the master planning process and what our goal was, the committee goal was. As we stated, we've reiterated this every single meeting. We've looked at it and said, well, this is our goal, and this is what the committee's goal was to do. So that's what we've done. So that's kind of the early background. We go through the master planning objectives. We tell the board what our objectives were and check them off as we've done them. The next thing is we talk about the planning steps and everything that we've gone through, everything that all of you have gone through for the last several months here. We would identify, articulate that to the board as to the whys and hows and everything that was done and what that was all about. So again, that's all part of it. We talk about the master planning process, why it was important, why it is important, how we would prioritize things going into the future, and how the brainstorming and all those kinds of things were so important in what we did. As ideas surfaced, we moved things around, we answered the questions as to why or why we didn't make changes or improvements based upon logistics. And we talk about the process of the task force. You know, we worked with the group, the man group, we discussed all these different things, and And again, we had resident discussion for every meeting thereafter, other than the first meeting. I think we missed that, but since then, those residents who were in attendance were able to ask questions and weigh in with their comments that we took into consideration. So we thought that would be an important slide to have in there as well. And then also, we would go back to the board and let them know that when we first got started with this, and we've kept these ideas in mind as we go along, and that is what our survey told us that we took last year. So we would review those survey results as to potential future improvements. This is what our community told us was most important to them. First of all, about the community as a whole. Secondly, the preserve, what's the important items there. Same thing, we go to Mountain View, highest rated priorities and why we looked at those and how they are important in the planning process. And then on to other improvements, recreational improvements and other items in the community beneficial to our health and welfare, health and well-being, those kinds of things, and how important those were. So those are the things we wanted to talk about before we got into the goals and timeline as what we did and what we accomplished each meeting, how we set that out. And then we would go through the slides that that Glenn just went through with everyone from the very beginning as to each individual project and then the opinion of probable costs behind that. Dan circulated a presentation from another community that I hope everyone had an opportunity to take a look at that. There was some good information in there as well. And we believe on the front end of this presentation we can incorporate some of that information as well because we want to really let the board know our thoughts and ideas that went into every single one of these decisions. But this is just an early kind of time or an early look at what we want that presentation to be as we present it to the board next month. And certainly want your input on that. Dan, do you have some thoughts on that or talk about that presentation a little further?
Well, I think it's kind of a nice lead into the other thing I think that needs to go into this presentation to the board was what we were planning to do for our next step on the agenda. And that was to capture the key learnings that we've had. And I know I only gave you a day to think about it, but some of you were faster than others. You probably had already written it out and had it journaled and a bunch of other things, and the rest of us, we found ourselves sitting around last night over a libation and kind of scratching notes to ourselves. But I would love to just capture, maybe go around the room, give me one, or give Sean one, since she's writing, at a time. A key learning you've had over the last 6 months that we need to make sure that the board hears. Is that kind of, let's do it now. I think it's right to do now, because I want to make sure that we get Kevin and Glenn's input on this too, because they're going to bring a little different perspective, I think. Because they have all these other places they've been, and so they're going to have some other maybe key learnings that they've seen here, with dealing with us, that maybe the board should also hear. Who would like to go first? One. Just do one and then rotate it around.
Denise wanted to be first, but I beat her to the mic.
If I don't spell it right, I'll fix it better.
What are you trying to spell?
I always spell it
Whose idea was that? Oh, that was your idea.
wrong. Yeah, if you want to be first, you should have done it right and been the writer.
The very first thing, as far as the takeaway for me that I want the entire board, Glenn, was the very first discussion you had with Dan and I about focus cell versus a nuclear community. And nothing does that better than your first slide up there, where you put HOA1 in the middle and how we're all spread out around HOA1. That's a huge education point for our entire community, not just the board, but for all of our advisory committees and for the residents themselves. So that's takeaway number one for me. Focus cell versus nuclear community.
Yeah, and as we've been going through this process, both from the golf side as well as the facility side, for me, the thing we have to get out of, we have to break our aging cycle. Right now, we've let everything get to the point that it is, right? So we haven't seen how any of this could be done in phases, but as you look at all of that, plus our golf courses, you're like, how can we ever get out of this cycle where you're looking at $120 million? And how do we approach it in a thoughtful way?
So what is coming out of right?
My learning is that everything is so old. That's us. But we have a cycle of lack of planning. So I guess my big aha was we need to get into a cycle of much better planning because we got to a 27-year mark with huge amount of need.
I'm gonna second that one, and I put a little more emphasis on, we've got to let the community really truly get their arms around that planning doesn't just mean you want to spend a lot of money. That's part of what got us into the situation we're in today, is past boards didn't want to take the look, they knew what they would get from the community, and now here we sit. To your point, we have got to get our arms around maybe a committee that is planning, forever planning. I mean, that cannot be a bad word. That cannot be in this community because this is why we are where we are. To your point, amen.
Okay, again, towards that, it's 27 years old. So we're going to wait 25 years to fix Mountain View. So that's 52 years old. What do you think is going to happen after 52 years of doing nothing?
Well, we see what's happened after
But-
27.
And I understand that, but now it's going to be 25 more years. And now is not going to happen, we know that. We can do chunks at a time, but you can't, everything here is 27 years old.
Okay, so what's the message to the board?
My message to the board is we have certain things that we could fix really quick, and that is, we've discussed it, the facilities that are in pretty bad shape. And that's an easy win, and that could be something that we could show the board that there's positive things towards that.
So is another way to say that prioritize some early wins?
Yes.
Okay, from a staff standpoint, this is critical to the staff so that it helps us know where to focus and what's coming up next. I've been here 10 years and a lot of times I'm like, okay, so what's going to happen next year? I'm not sure what's going to happen next year. It depends on, what the board wants to do. But having a plan that passes from board to board would really help the staff in kind of planning for what's coming up next and knowing what to focus on. And then just one more comment. Hats off to the facilities teams who have continued to keep these buildings going. The outside skin may look kind of worn, but I can tell you the facilities folks have kept these air conditioners and hinges and all of this stuff in operating condition. So hats off to Bill. Are you back here still somewhere? I thought I saw him, but that's all I have.
He was here.
Well, one of the things I wanted to say to the board was how we need to take care of our maintenance people and how they're working in these terrible conditions. And we're not going to be able to keep the good people if we cannot get some of these new parts better for them so they have a place to stay or, go to rest or eat and that is in all the facilities. But the maintenance ones right now are the worst. So I think that they need to think about the employees as well.
I think what I would like to say is, in the last week or so, this has come to better light for me. And there's a difference between maintaining and getting functionality that you might desire that you haven't had. Right? We started on the Mountain View renovation project 2 times now. And what we're focusing on here is more of a functionality perspective, I think, right, than an aesthetic thing. But as you get to that, you still need to maintain. Matt and I talked about it at lunchtime today, right? You still have to maybe change the carpet and maybe update the restrooms. You're not going to get the outdoor, what did you call it, a meeting place right away, but all those other things still have to take place in the meeting. So really 2 different processes.
Sean?
Yeah.
From a structural perspective and a customer service, the kitchens in both of our clubhouses are too small.
Structural, and what was the other thing you said now?
The kitchens in our clubhouses are too small. In other words, when we're serving the residents, a lot of times people think customer service is due to a lack of training or effort. When we have challenges related to the facility that we're actually working out of, trying to serve, think about serving restaurant and dealing with a function in here out of a kitchen that's 50% of what it should be.
Okay, you said structural and something.
Customer service. I'm going to speak really slow next time.
I got it.
I think too, when we go to the board, which is to also for the larger community, is they don't know what they don't know, right? So Walter, that little tour you took us on was very eye-opening, right? I think that, you can't throw these large numbers out there in front of people and they're just gonna blow it away. Like, yeah, that 100 million is 30,000 out of my pocket. $300 from each of us is $1 million. I mean, they've got the math down pat. But the key thing is we have to show them why, okay? And we don't often take that step with them. We'll put out surveys, and there's numbers in there. And some of this still contradicts some of the numbers that are in the survey. But we have to get their eyes on the problem. And that's a different kind of reach out than we've been doing. I think whether Matt is videos of these spaces, but just naked numbers and talk, it's not going to move us forward the way we need to and as quickly as we need to. And the other part about this is the numbers are so huge. Everybody's going to say, what can we do now? It's not all of this, right? So, we were talking about this last week with Troon. All the golf course are 9 holes. What are you going to do? It's a money problem. It's not a desire problem. It's a money problem, right? So how do you find the small fruit that you can benefit from? But people have to see where we're going to go. This kind of a presentation can produce a lot more negatives than positive based on its words and numbers, and their experience with the numbers so far is not there. But I think you can convince them if they saw some of what we saw, it would be a different story. And when I go in people's houses and I tell them that our kitchen is no bigger than their villa, okay, they realize that that's a different concept, right? So our reach out to these people with numbers only, it's going to go crashing down. We have to find a new technique. But we can't do it all in big projects. Because every time we close something down, we lose revenue, right? And that's the cycle.
So what was the takeaway for the board?
The table.
I'm going to summarize it for you, okay? Market the issues,
There you go.
okay?
Visual.
That's what you said.
And I was thinking along that line earlier when I was thinking back about when HOA 1 first got turned over and then they had several assessments. Those assessments were fairly sizable. I'm sure they were choking on them. You know, I wasn't here, but I'm sure they were choking on them. In our monies today, I'm sure that's over $10,000 of our money that we'd be looking at, maybe 15, who knows. But at the time, as I was thinking about it, HOA 1 had a vision. And the vision was, we want a resort-like experience. They were a little bit younger, because of the age, and they wanted a private golf club, and they wanted a resort experience. And so they marketed, I think, that. And that may be how they sold those assessments, I don't know. But they had to sell those assessments, I'm sure. So, okay, I like that, market the issue.
Most of everything's been mentioned. The eye-opener was the maintenance facilities, obviously, and I think the only way that we can sell that one is the carrot and stick thing. You've got to throw in, as the same project, the less expensive, the gathering place at Desert View, maybe cover the lap pool, walking trails, you know, just kind of throw that one in as the carrots to go along with the maintenance, because we saw it, but I just don't see the rest of the residents getting that at all.
So can we follow up on that? Because you both hit that same thing when we talked about marketing the issues. So I'm open to all the advice that all the residents have here that aren't sitting on the board about how do we take this campaign. Okay, I'm with you on the numbers. I get the numbers. The numbers are really irrelevant for what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is say to the community, we've identified our problem sets. We recognize now the condition of our maintenance facilities, the lack of size, appropriate size of our kitchens, and the constraints that we have because of that, and whatever else we think are the major short-term problems. One of the things that people here don't want to be educated. So help me understand how we educate a group of people that tell you they don't want to be educated. I'm open to those thoughts.
No, it's not that they don't want to be educated. They don't want to have numbers thrown at them, numbers that they know they can't afford, right? Because they're sensitized to their money issues, right? But seeing is believing, okay? You have to educate them with something like, what are the safety issues at the CAM facility? What is it like to serve breakfast in the kitchen at Mountain View? These are the things that they will want to hear about, okay? And that is going to spur them to the next step. But a numbers discussion and all of the talk is not going to get them there, okay? We have to get them involved in the problem. And right now, the problems are all behind the scenes. These aren't things they see every day. So we have to get them to the places where the trouble is and move them along with us, okay, to the dollars. Don't start with the dollars. Start with what's the scene behind the scenes, okay? And we can't live like this, okay? We can't have our food out in the parking lot. We can't have racks in the middle of the kitchen that you couldn't exit in a fire alarm. We can't have 100 gallons of gas and not a second place of egress. I mean, we got things we can tell them that we all learned about, and it's time to tell them so that they understand why we have to move forward. They just don't know why.
Well, can we start by telling the board all these things?
Absolutely, but the board is more than aware. I think of all these issues, and the CAM facility, and the other thing is, this thing with CAM and golf course and maintenance, like, what is it? Is it one thing, or is it two things? Are there golf maintenance facilities, and then should there be a separate CAM? Can they coexist together as two CAM and golf? I'm confused on that. You know, right now, we bought all this equipment and we're putting it all in one location or two locations, but, I mean, are they shared facilities or should they be shared facilities? I don't understand that, and I would need the board to help us figure that out because they know what's coming in terms of future equipment. But my point is, the residents are sitting up at 10,000 feet with these numbers and things going before them, but we need to bring them down to the scene. And I think the board can do that by working with them differently, not just talking to them.
How would you work with them differently, Denise?
I would have tours of the kitchen, I would have tours of the CAM facility, I would do videos, Sean, that you've been doing of these facilities so they can see. I would say, you know, I would relate to them, the next time you complain about a banquet that had cold food, do you understand why? Because they don't. They just think it's something that we don't know how to do. They don't realize there's a physical problem behind that. So it's that kind of grassroots exposure of what's going on that I think the board has not done, and that's where we need to take them. And I'd be willing to help, but you know, it's a different way you talk to the residents than giving them a PowerPoint slideshow. That is not going to get them off their chairs to rally and pay for this. They've got to see it to believe it.
I like the idea of videos. I think it's more manageable for our community because I continuously hear that I'm busy. I have these appointments, I can't go to the tour at that time, and then they become oblivious. So if we do tours, if we put it online, it's accessible to everyone 24/7. There really could be no excuse that you didn't see it. And maybe start there, and then if there's more interest, I just want to be sensitive to employees here that when we're waltzing our residents through these facilities that are in tremendous disrepair, and we have employees working in them, that we just got to be sensitive to. This is not like a show. I mean, I want to be sensitive to when that could get a little touchy, having residents walk through why employees are trying to get their jobs done.
Plus, I think the other thing we need to remember is, besides that, and Denise, I totally concur with that, we have to be careful. We can't be waltzing people through the kitchen. That's a health issue. That's
Yeah, videos.
somebody could video, that's for sure. But we've got to be very, very careful because when we went to see the maintenance facilities almost 2 years ago, when I first got on the board, and I saw feces, rat feces, on the table they had to eat at, I was horrified. Plus, I didn't want to say, you guys eat them? You know, we need to be very sensitive. They're working, they're doing their very, very best. So, you know, and I don't know how many residents care. I just don't know. I'm not saying negative, positive. I just don't know how many care.
So for your list, since I'm going to try to bring us back to the task at hand, which is what do we want to make sure the board hears? In the walk around that we did, the areas back here behind the ballroom.
What do you call it? The banquet hall.
The banquet hall. That is another one of my priorities, should be a priority for us to look for an early win. It's not one of those things that our community is going to necessarily see, but that's a win for our employees hugely. And it's, again, one of those, I think, is going to be one of those easier to do versus harder to do standalone kind of projects.
You're talking about this hallway?
Yeah, hallway in this area back there. Service hall. Yeah.
But also the porches, right?
Yeah, I think the porches become a part of that because that's what gets you that first bite, right? Okay?
I do think that it'd be not that expensive and maybe a first win to figure out an enclosure to get some storage, to open up some of these spaces, to take it away from these hallways. I mean, it's like as somebody said, it's a domino thing. So we're just gonna have to prioritize, explain things. The board knows where some of these situations are. The past two boards have known where some of these situations are. So this is not gonna be a shock, but we just have to help prioritize and what does that list look like.
Others? Gentlemen, you got any that we haven't hit that you think we should be capturing up there that our board needs to hear?
Well, I think it's important to know, for the board to know that this is not unique, and we've said this before, that we go into these types of communities and standalone clubs all the time when we follow a developer, because developers build inadequately for when the community's eventually built out. They build something for when they first get started, but as we continue to grow and grow and grow and everything gets more use, things become inadequate, and that's exactly what's happening. Kitchens are inadequate, golf course maintenance facilities are inadequate, there's no CAM storage facilities whatsoever, administrative staff areas are inadequate. Those are just a function of the way the community was designed. And oftentimes you're going to have members who've been here a long time say, well, it's always functioned until now, why now? But again, it's just repeating, telling the story over and over and over. How many meals we served 20 years ago versus how many meals we serve now, how many residents then versus now. Those kinds of things are all important, no question about it. But when we walk into communities, that's what we see, right, Glenn?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly it. There's just so many good ideas that are sort of percolating up here in this, and trying to, I think that the real thing that the learning that I sort of take away from everything is that yes, there is a lot to do here. It's a lot. I understand that. But if you don't have a plan, then you won't get you there, right? So let's have a plan. In our learning, I hope that what we're imparting is find manageable bites that you can start on that plan and do it that way. So it's sort of advised, let's not talk about numbers, but we said we would, and so we did. But the numbers, as you said, there's a way it just shuts everybody down. But I think you just have to look at them as a tool. It's a tool that we can use to help us prioritize what we think is really important, right? So, yeah, we love all those ideas at that thing, but that's a lot of money. There's something else that we can do that gets us a step towards it. And we've got time to work on it. And that's one other learning I think I would like to bring to you is that you have a tremendous amount of power here in this community. I know nobody wants to give $300 or $3,000 or $10,000 or whatever up out of their thing, but you have a lot of power in your size, in your population base here, to raise a lot of money with relatively little input compared to what some of our communities have to face. And your community can strive to be better over time by sort of developing this sort of aspect of just expecting that continuous improvements means that we need to reinvest in our facilities over time, and it's not going to happen just based on, we have to have a way of doing that, and it's not just the obligatory things that we have to do. We have to have some way of funding aspirational things as well, because we're always going to have aspirations, we're always going to want to see improvements, and we have to think about ways that we can institute within our community this cycle of improvement that just sort of recognizes that we're going to be contributing towards those improvements out of our. The good news about that is that your house value is whether you get it or your heirs get it, is directly related to how good this community is. So the better we make this community, the more attractive it is, more people are going to want to be here, and your values are going to go up over time. And it's the same thing with your own personal residence, right? You may live in that residence and want to just live in it forever and just pass it on, but that's not, our community cannot be that way. We have to, just like you would in your personal residence, you have to renovate your kitchen every so often. You have to put down new carpet every so often. Those things just have to happen, and we have to institute that level of, which I think we've taken really just the first step in doing this master plan to get us there.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about it, and you know, the developer had certain goals and objectives in mind when they developed the community before it got turned over. And once turnover occurred, the boards were very busy doing a lot of other things. And now it's time for the board and the community to step up and move forward. To say that, you know, we talked earlier, the can has been kicked down the road long enough. Well, we're running out of roadway, and there's nowhere left to kick the can. So things have to move forward.
I think both of you said something though that, you know, it will resonate, is we have to take baby steps out of this, okay? And they have to be steps forward. So Kevin, you said, how many meals did we serve, you know, in 2013? In 2017 after transition? How many meals are we serving now? The kitchen has not changed on that whole period of time. So some data that the board can talk to us about in terms of things like meals served, okay? And at first, the maintenance building was just golf course. Now it's golf course and camp. How many vehicles did we have then? How many things do we have now? I mean, I think there's data to mine around this that shows, you know, why we have to take some steps forward. And that data is probably more important than the big numbers that we're seeing here now as to why are we going and why do we need to take a next baby step to start to move forward. So I'm sure we have some good data around how much things have ramped up. Look at food and beverage, how much they're serving now versus a year and a half ago when everybody thought the food was awful and they wouldn't go there. So, you know, I think, but this still is the case. Like I said, the videos are seeing it. The idea, what's the data usage increase, okay? The preserve was a fiction in everybody's imagination 13 years ago, okay? Now look at it, okay? So there's cases to be built with data, and there's visual cases. I'm fearful of the big numbers that they just shut right down on that, but I think the small baby step stuff is there for positive momentum.
So I'm kind of in my own notes here writing down that it's almost like a need for a marketing committee that's going to go do data collection, help develop a better or a different way to communicate with the community. I wrote down for my own list, a lot of these big projects probably have a 2 or 3 year lifespan. And you don't really start spending a lot of money on those things until you're about into year 2 anyway. And so there's probably a need for some kind of a project development or a long-term planning committee that takes direction from the board that says, got it, we'll go do the front end and really understand like the kitchen here at Mountain View and what are really our options and what are really our issues, right? Because those are teams that are going to have a lot of operational input, I think, you know, because, I mean, we don't know. I mean, it's the folks doing the work that know what the real issues are. So those feel like outcomes that need to be, you know, the board needs to be thinking in terms of, yeah, we gotta go get a committee together or a task force together to go chase after that sort of thing. And those are two things that need to be done.
Yeah, and there's very easy low-hanging fruit. We learned right at the very beginning around hiking trails. 64% in the survey said they wanted hiking trails. Now, we don't know what that means, if that's a path okay, really a hiking trail. But that's something that the board could act on, saying, I'm going to involve our hiking club, okay, and some other residents, and as we talked about, whether it's markers to identify the trails we already have, we found that we wanted to preserve. What it needs is a little parking lot, okay, it's not been budgeted for or anything, but that one, the board could say, we heard this in the survey, 64% of you said this, okay, we're gonna act on it, okay, and it's a low-hanging fruit that is right there. We have a club that will take initiative in its design, run with it, okay?
So many, many months ago, that board member over there was handed that baton. And he was handed the baton because he was just as passionate as you were about those walking trails and the survey data. And when he tried to put some people together to work on that problem set,
Okay, but I already got people that I talked to about this, okay? I got people. I got hiking club president, and I got another person of the hiking club. They can't build a park, you know that yellow one we added to the thing that's up there? Okay, it's there. It just needs, it's gonna need some gravel, it's gonna need a little cleanup, which the hiking club would do the cleanup, but the gravel has to come from the HOA. They need a little parking lot, because the preserve doesn't want the parking on their streets. Okay, the hiking club tried to do, our hiking club tried to do this with HOA 1. And because somebody lived in the place they were going to be, that all got sent out. But we have people. We do have people.
nobody brought that to HOA 2.
I know.
So you're going to be the face of that too?
You go.
That's on our own.
No, Denise just signed up there. Don't write it. Go ahead, Jeff.
The right to be.
Yeah, I think it's important as we kind of finish up, we've heard a lot of great comments here today, and Glenn and I have talked about recommendations to the board, and we believe some of the recommendations are pretty straightforward. And that is that this committee recommends that the board incorporate the master plan as presented into the strategic plan. The board has a strategic plan that's going to be updated and reviewed on an annual basis. The master plan should be part of the strategic plan. We believe there should be an ongoing facility or long-range planning committee that looks at these things to evaluate it, that works in close cooperation with the finance committee on when things need to be done in the future. But you can have that committee and empower them with some of those low-hanging fruit types of things. But the board needs to decide how that governance structure works, and whether it's an ad hoc committee for hiking trails, or it's a continuation. I know there was a committee on the golf course maintenance and camp improvements. We need to reconstitute that group or bring it back, or whatever, and say, now you've got the support of the full master planning committee that we need to do something with the proposals to the board, whatever it may be. So we believe those are important recommendations that move forward, because this has, we can't have this plan be finished and have it sit in a desk drawer. It has to continue on an annual basis, and Denise, to your point, we can't be afraid of dollars and cents, because everything costs money, but we're not doing all this at one time. We're just going to start slowly and move forward with it. But it's got to be part of the plan.
So one thing that I think we're trying to do here is start to instigate an opportunity to really enroll our entire community residents in solving these problems. It's what you're talking about. You're showing them pictures. That starts to define the problem. And you start to ask them for advice on how they would see solving that problem. So it's good to listen. Our survey did that, and we've got a lot of good data there. But I think that has to continue on over time. I think, the thing that we always say is that if you want to get advice from somebody, go and ask them for money. If you want to get money from them, go and ask them for advice. So that gives you the opportunity through, there's ways of staging these plans like you're talking about, where you define the problem, you ask for their help, you literally ask, in a very targeted survey sometimes, how would you address this problem? And that gives you some data around what the community as a whole is thinking about. How would you address one specific problem, and how would they do that? Asking for that advice, inviting them in to help us solve the problems, builds a coalition within the community. There's always going to be 20% of the people who are going to say, no, I don't want to spend any money. And if You can't do anything about them, you can't listen to them too much. They're there, you have them, you have to realize they're there, but what you've got to do is you've got to effectuate the people who are willing to play the game with us and make the community better. Next steps.
So for next steps, we'll have notes from today's meeting, we'll distribute those. We really don't believe we don't have much to revise on the master plan concepts on this, but the next meeting is October 22nd, and that's when we'll make the recommendation to the board with the key task force learnings as well. So this subcommittee will be working with us at McMahon to put together the presentation that we go forward with, and certainly that's part of the committee meeting. We want all of you to be there as we meet with the board and present the plan. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
If you go back to the agenda, it said, you don't have to, it said, I need to have some volunteers to join me over the next 2 weeks before I disappear. So I really, these 4 pages right here are so powerful in terms of what we want to make sure is part of this presentation to the board. I'd love to have a couple of volunteers to help. How do we condense this into some workable information points that we want to make sure we deliver to the board as a part of our presentation? And I'm looking for volunteers to help me. I know I had Denise. She was hooked, and you know, it's a good thing she's not a fish because she'd be too easy. But I have all next week, any time in the afternoon to work on this, and that's why I'm looking for anybody else who wants to be a part of helping consolidate this information. And I'm almost thinking, Sean, you have to be part of that, because nobody else can read your writing.
Yeah, no, I can, I'll type it up. Problem is, when I'm sitting here thinking that, yeah, I'd like to do it, but I'm on the board.
I know.
So
I know.
I think people that aren't on the board need to present it to us. I'm happy to take this home and type it up. I can.
Okay. Gosh, Cindy, that was like pulling the teeth.
Brad will do it if you meet before Thursday.
As in this week before?
Oh, you're talking about next week?
Yeah,
You do it next week?
I can do it next week.
See?
Can we do that?
You just gotta ask.
You just have to ask.
I'll be back on Monday.
Nicely. Okay, so let's target for next. Yeah, I'll send an invite out, and we'll try to sit down and we'll get a room somewhere we can, and that way Sean will have to get this done before next
It'll
Monday.
be done tonight.
All right. I think we've accomplished that piece. I think we're ready. You guys are good to go. If you need to run to go see the airplane, the inside of an airplane again, and we'll turn it over to the community after we take a 5-minute restroom break. Okay? Nine. Eight.
Stop with the number. Sorry.
6.
Seven.
I skipped.
Okay. Good job. We're supposed to be Wednesday. You don't have to figure it out. All right.
It's just
Right. We're into the community portion. The community's gotten very, very small.
Yes.
You each have whatever you need, 5 minutes. Here you go.
I'm good. I have no questions.
Anyone?
Oh, one question I do have. I was wondering on Friday.
It's my understanding that
from the last meeting, that kind of the priorities were number one from this group was the golf facility / camp. And it sounds like we already have plans, not sure that those were the ones that would be used, but I would like to see those plans. And I don't understand, are they taking a building down, adding 2 more? Are they working with this building that's already there? They're already in existence.
The answer is no. We have 3 options that we held on the table for the master plan, A, B, and C.
I'm not talking about that.
Let me help you. Okay, what you're trying to get at is BKW is a construction firm that Troon brought in here, and they looked at both the preserve and the Mountain View facilities. And one, Troon told us what the recommended size of those facilities should be. BKW, their construction, a contractor that they would use for this kind of work, came in and did a preliminary assessment of what they could do with the existing facilities. So that design work, that preliminary, this is what could be done, we do have that.
Okay.
Okay, there's no reason why you can't have it.
Fantastic, thank you.
But what are you gonna do with it? Yeah, the point was, that was option A that we were talking about, right? Okay.
But let's just be clear on this. I've never heard of it, I've never seen it. So I'd be real careful on what you're sharing out there right now, because just because they produce it doesn't mean we're moving one step forward.
I know that.
Okay, I just want to be clear that what the information that we're sharing and around whoever, I don't care, we can tell the whole world, but I mean, it hasn't been brought forward to anybody.
Yeah. Well, the other part is, every project like this really needs to go to another level of definition, okay? Because you know, you can say, well, we got a solution, well, what was the problem? All right, and then typically every project starts with, well, what's the issue or what's the problem? And I think that's got to be a critical next step for any one of these projects that we talked about up here, is because that's part of that value equation of how important is that really going to be? What's the value we're going to get back for doing it? So, before we start on any project, we're going to certainly want to go through and understand the issues and kind of peel it back 2 or 3 layers and really get down in the dirt of, so how do we solve this so that we give our boards in the future options, right? Because we can do a baby step, but that's not going to necessarily accomplish, everything we're hoping is going to accomplish. So.
Well, I mean, we know as much as we love it, we aren't doing all of this at once, but that facility in particular, from a safety standards, et cetera, seems to be a high priority. The golf and camp facility, looking at Sean. So the reason I wanted to see it was just to see, he said it would be $2.5 to $3 million for that space. Was that building a new building, or what might we be able to do in pieces? So just wanted to take a look at it and compare. I mean, I know it may or may not get done, but just wanted to see what was planned, or not even planned, but what was suggested in a perfect world. An option that could be available.
I'm going to say this one more time, because I want it on tape. The next step for this work, we're going to present it to the board. The board's going to end up with a master plan. What's the board going to do with the master plan? Kevin Carroll was responsible for helping us produce the strategic plan last year, and he just told you this needs to be incorporated into that process. The next step beyond that is the formation of believe it or not, we used to have a facilities committee. And that facilities committee did such good work that in transition it was dissolved. I guess in transition we figured we were never going to ever enhance another facility. And we laugh about that. Okay, we are busy undoing a lot of years of interesting decision making. And so I've already talked to you today about planning. That facilities committee is going to be filled with the same kind of people that did the Mountain View renovation 11 years ago. Those were architects, those were construction company owners, those were engineers, people that understand how to take good ideas and really go and make it happen on the ground. And so that's where we're headed to. And so there is so much ground to be plowed before we ever get the first idea in front of the residents. And if we could just, what do you say to me all the time? Slow your what?
Slow your roll.
Slow my roll. That's Denise slowing me down, right? We all have to just take a deep breath here and understand there's a process being laid out here that is multi-year. Quite frankly, this one is multi-decade, right? That's what we're talking about. And it's really the same approach for everything here that we took with the golf courses 3 years ago when we said, hey, we got this 30-year reserve study. We need to be thinking out 30 years. And everybody laughed at me then. Not laughing so hard anymore. If we start doing these planning processes properly, all this stuff gets easier for everybody, for residents, for the staff, and for the board, as we can move forward arm in arm.
Yeah, I totally agree, but I think what we need is, when we produce this for the board, and the board, has the plan in hand, I think, like we said we did today, there's some things that could be acted on that show it's not going to end up on the shelf, okay? So the hiking thing, maybe moving forward on this camera maintenance building thing, getting somebody to look at that, because again, we've seen this. This is not new. This has been going on, and again, kicking the can down the road. It can't be kicked anymore. So, getting an action item out of that one, maybe starting on a more distant action item on the kitchen sizes. But again, by gathering the data, what's the service rate, what's all of that. I think getting some action items out of this, once it's presented to the board, shows the community that it wasn't done just for the sake of adding it to a plan. It's actually going to be acted upon.
Well, you're talking to the Get Her Done team here, Denise. All we do is get things done. So let me make this as clear as I can make it about all these quick wins. All these quick wins come out of something called the Capital Improvement Fund. We are in the process of building the 2025 budget with a 5-year budget and a 10-year projection. Now, in all the debate behind the scenes, Ms. Sherry, and all the rest of the people out there, what are we trying to do with the community improvement fee money? We're trying to wipe it all out and help reduce the ask on residents as far as what we need to get through the obligatory requirements in the reserve fund. Next 5 years, that's a $27 million bill. I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody in the community who wants to have a conversation, as long as we talk about connecting all the dots. And so we can sit in a room and we can wax philosophical about all the things that we would like to do, the low-hanging fruit, still has to be paid for. And it has to be paid for out of the Capital Improvement Fund. No money in, no money out. And so you're going to get to choose here in these next 60 days as we sit around and cuss and discuss how we're going to come out of this 5-year budget planning process. But you can have anything you want. You just can't have everything. So the only thing I'm telling you is obligatory will always trump aspirational, because that's our fiduciary obligation to the community. So as long as we can all get on the same sheet of music and we understand where the dollars come in and we get to allocate how the dollars go out, but once they're gone, they're gone. And so I'm excited about the next 60 days because we're creating venues to have these debates. But many of you have already made your positions known. And many on the board have already declared themselves on how they see those positions. And so what I'm telling you is, the very first slide up there told you nothing on this plan aspirational is going to happen before 2029. Unless major decisions are changed that are in front of us right now. And I don't see that happening.
Don't agree. You can't have safety issues that you.
I'd like to know where we are in the reserve study. I believe the reserve study, and I'm looking at you, Walter, because I know you kind of know that better than anybody. What did the reserve study say about what we need to refurbish this very, very old clubhouse? Is that part of the reserve study?
Yes, in the reserve study, it has lines that say you gotta replace the carpet, and you gotta replace the chairs and the tables. So all of those lines, if you add them all up, they're north of 700,000, probably closer to $1 million, if you take all of those lines in the reserve study. So it depends on how you want to address them, how you want to consolidate them, how many of them you want to address at one time.
Well, and that would be what, on my piece of paper that I wrote, a win-win or win-now thing, to replace the things that are worn out. I'm not a carpet expert. I personally don't like this carpet, but the carpet experts have said it's old, it's worn, it needs to be replaced. The ladies from the cribbage, or what is it, that plays up at the reserve, they're tired of sitting on those crummy old chairs. People are tired of sitting in crummy old chairs here. That's the kind of stuff that we really need to think about doing, and I'm hoping it's going to be in the budget.
So you're back to the point Ray made, is there's a difference between, these little maintaining things versus bigger ideas on, functionality of programs. So, yeah, so those things are in the reserve, and again, you gotta decide on when you want to do those. Because they're probably gonna have to be done before we get to past 29, so.
Oh, God, it needs to be done next year. And I find it interesting that the comment today, we shouldn't kick the can down the road any further, got a lot of this. That same comment was made in January and February and was poo-pooed.
Is there any more resident questions?